Bilderberg 2025 just happened, and I wanted to know a little bit more. But, the details are scarce. It's not easy for things to remain secret in our time. We live in an age of near constant surveillance and endless amounts of information sources. But some powerful groups, somehow, manage to pull it off. Bilderberg is one of those cases. And that's because the meetings are organized according to Chatham House rules, which means they can't disclose the sources, can't talk about anything really, a detailed agenda is not set, resolutions are not proposed, voting is not conducted, and political statements are not published. But you can bet your ass that it's all about expanding their influence and tightening their grip on power. It's funny. They often proclaim that these meetings are supposed to promote democratic ideals, but it's really just a bunch of corrupt politicians and seedy corporatists pursuing some kind of, neo-Marxist agenda. First, I guess we should check out their official press release. The 71st Bilderberg meeting will take place on June 12th through the 15th in Stockholm, Sweden. They say, and I quote, "A diverse group of political leaders and corporatists from industry, finance, academia, and media have been invited." So, who was invited? Well, you should check out the full list if you have some time, because there's some weird names on here, such as Stacey Abrams, of all people. But we also have Chrystia Freeland of Canada, the CEO of Pfizer, Klaus Schwab was there, Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, Microsoft sent their CEO as well. You have the bankers from Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, the International Bank of Settlements made an appearance, and then we have a bunch of European royal families and finance ministers who were also present. Oddly enough, CEOs and high-level personnel from companies such as Spotify, Warner Brothers, the New York Times, and even Volvo got an invite. Now, the so-called steering committee for Bilderberg include people like Mark Rutte, who is the head of NATO. That came after he tried to steal all that farmland in the Netherlands and enacted a bunch of violence against his citizens during COVID. But this steering committee also includes Alex Karp and Peter Thiel of Palantir. Yeah. Now with that said, let's go over the topics that are going to be discussed, and I'll quickly speculate on some details, because as I've said, we have nothing concrete. Now, one last thing. I'm going to try to look at it from their perspective. I'm going to try to put myself in their shoes, so to speak. Alright, this is not my perspective. So when I start talking about Iran, don't take what I'm saying as evidence of me wanting to go to war with Iran, alright? That's not what I want. But anyway. So first on the list, we have the transatlantic relationship. This is really a staple of every Bilderberg meeting since 1954. And then number 2, we have Ukraine. Specifically, it's on the future of Ukraine. It's kind of funny that people still believe Ukraine acts with autonomy, because I get the feeling that they're entirely run by Western governments, as a proxy. Number 3, the U.S. economy. More than likely, this is all about Trump's economic plans, new tariff policies, and the effect of everything on the global market. Since it's mainly all about Europe at Bilderberg, it's probably about how our policies affect their energy markets, stuff like that. And then number 4, Europe. If I had to guess, it's probably about their economies, political instability, migration, and of course, how they can continue to crush populist movements to enable their shift toward Agenda 2030, of which they are not going to give up on. Which brings us to number 5, the Middle East. And more than likely now, it's all about Israel's war with Iran, countering Iran's influence, supporting allies, destabilization, energy routes, pipelines, all that stuff. And then we have number 6, the authoritarian axis. And I'm guessing that's referring to China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So we have China's technological and economic rise, propped up by the West, mind you, Russia's war in Ukraine, and a possible confrontation with NATO, Iran's regional destabilization, and North Korea's nuclear ambitions. I'm sure they're going to have input from guys like Peter Thiel and Alex Karp on leveraging AI and surveillance tech, because of course they will, right? And that brings us to number 7, defense innovation and resilience, which means modernizing Western defense capabilities, probably. Discussions may have included adopting AI-driven technologies, drones, cyber warfare, and strengthening supply chains for military hardware. As I said, Palantir's at the meeting and are actually in charge of the steering committee, so they're key players in defense tech, which probably means we're going to have some new public-private partnerships on the horizon. But yeah, resilience could involve things like hybrid threats like cyber attacks, which I believe is way too easy to pull off in these wars. I mean, our collective infrastructure, it's not built for this new world. We're still running on ancient power grids. Alright, so moving on, number 8, AI, deterrence, and national security. Well, that one's kind of self-explanatory. The role of artificial intelligence in national security and deterrence. Think autonomous weapons, cyber defense, and risks of falling behind China. Perhaps, yeah, just perhaps, they might be talking about some ethical concerns, such as AI safety and regulating artificial superintelligence or artificial general intelligence. Although, most of these people are ghouls, so it's probably all about how they can use it unethically to gain control over rivals and the population alike. And that brings us to number 9, proliferation. And these days, it's not just about nuclear proliferation, alright? I'm sure things like chemical and biological weapons are included too. It also probably includes emerging threats like biotech, given that in 2024 the Bilderberg focus was on, and I quote, the changing faces of biology. But real quick, on the nuclear side, you have North Korea's missile tests, Iran's nuclear program, which has been in the news a lot since Israel started bombing the shit out of them, and Israel's been getting hit pretty hard too. We should stay out of it, just so you know my opinion on it. But anyway. They got themselves into quite the quagmire. But lest we forget, even Russia's possible use of tactical warheads in Ukraine was probably on the docket. And that brings us to number 10, geopolitics of energy and critical minerals. It's all about the new tech. From weapon systems, drones, satellites, and even green energy, it's all dependent upon rare earth minerals like lithium and cobalt. And pretty much everybody's in a race to control that. But then this final one is very, very interesting. Depopulation and migration. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the head of Pfizer is going to be leading that panel, and I'm only half joking. But really, from a mainstream type of perspective, depopulation and migration go hand in hand. They like to say that replacement is a conspiracy theory, but it's not. To counter declining birth rates, Western nations have decided to rely on migration to fill the gaps. But really, there's a bunch of side benefits for the power-hungry too, as mass immigration creates destabilization, which in turn allows them to crack down even more, increase surveillance throughout the entire world. All to keep you safe, they say. However, the demographic problems are real. A lot of aging populations throughout Europe and Japan, which will have massive economic impacts, labor shortages in the future, pension issues, social security, all of that stuff is included. Now, personally, I think it was all a plan. From the very beginning, really. They've been attacking population numbers in the world for damn near half a century, all a part of overpopulation and their solution, the limits to growth.
We had formed an organization called Zero Population Growth, and then Johnny took me on The Tonight Show.
Would you welcome Dr. Paul Ehrlich?
You have to get the death rate and birth rate in balance, and there's only 2 ways to do it. One is to bring the birth rate down, the other is to push the death rate up.
I did the show maybe 20 times, and we went from 6 chapters and 600 members to 600 chapters and 60,000 members.
We're starting in now. This is the first step.
The Bagleys belong to a growing number of young marrieds who favor ZPG, zero population growth.
How many children do you have?
2. I have 2 children.
Ehrlich's views on how to bring the birth rate down were concrete. Compulsion if voluntary methods fail. Creating a blacklist of people, companies, and organizations impeding population control in the U.S. Responsibility prizes for childless marriages. A tax on children. And a luxury tax on diapers and cribs.
The concerns about population became misanthropic. And it was taken with so much seriousness that Paul Ehrlich could recommend things like putting stuff in public water that would make people not as fertile.
Panic is not too strong a word to use for some of the advocates that I referred to as true believers.
It was a zeitgeist that was taking shape.
Attention, all citizens. Childbearing is herewith forbidden.
One of the things about zeitgeist is they have astonishing durability.
It appears that large families are on the way out, and ZPG may be possible.
And now, after poisoning everybody for decades, our birth rates are dropping, quite substantially. And now they come in with their solution, automation. You should listen to the dude from BlackRock talk about this. He's almost giddy at the thought.
I could argue in the developed countries, the big winners are countries that have shrinking populations. Okay, that's something that most people never talked about. We always used to think shrinking population is a cause for negative growth. But in my conversations with the leadership of these large developed countries that have xenophobic immigration policies, they don't allow anybody to come in, shrinking shrinking demographics, these countries will rapidly develop robotics and AI and technology. And if the promise, I didn't say it's going to happen, but if the promise of all that transforms productivity, which most of us think it will, we'll be able to elevate the standard of living of countries and the standard of living of individuals, even with shrinking populations. And so the paradigm of negative population growth is going to be changing. And the social problems that one will have in substituting humans for machines is going to be far easier in those countries that have declining populations. And so for those countries that have rising populations, the answer will be education, and so rapidly developing. For those countries that do not have a foundation of rule of law or education, they're going to be left. That's where the divide's going to get more and more extreme, and unfortunately.
Oh yeah, the real benefit of declining populations, automation. Yeah, great. Soulless people, I tell ya. As I said, there's not really much information out there. It's all hush-hush, as we know. However, I did come across something that was pretty interesting. This came from Georgetown's Journal of International Affairs. They interviewed some guy that's been following Bilderberg for a couple years, and he has some interesting things to say. So the first question, you have conducted extensive research on the Bilderberg Group. What is Bilderberg? Who are some of its members? And what has the group accomplished? He says, and I quote, Bilderberg is an elite, informal, private network of hundreds of influential business people, politicians, and intellectuals, primarily from Western Europe, the United States, and Canada. Since its beginning in the early 1950s, Bilderberg has pursued two main objectives, promoting European integration and transatlantic cooperation. He goes on to mention ties to the CIA, the Trilateral Commission, Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller, and claims their biggest accomplishment is the creation of the euro. Now, why so secret? Well, he goes on to say, and I quote again, Bilderbergers defend the private character of the meetings with the argument that the discussions must be off-record to allow participants to speak openly. I understand the argument and accept it to some extent. After all, everyone wants to speak with others in private at times. So why shouldn't the elites be allowed such an opportunity? On the other hand, however, the lack of transparency at Bilderberg creates space for backroom politics, lobbying, conflicts of interest, cronyism, and even collusion or corruption. As an example, he lists the first Bilderberg chairman, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, and he was implicated in a Lockheed Martin bribery scheme disclosed in the early 1970s. Yeah, the backroom deals. The backroom deals are a big problem. And then he mentions that the mainstream media and researchers got scared off by the quote-unquote conspiracy theorists. Yeah, sure thing. But really, the people who run Bilderberg started inviting legacy media organizations to it, included them in their corruption and planning, so of course, they're a part of it now, hence why they don't cover it. Now, personally, I thought this next part was pretty interesting. These meetings are where they tap their new pawns and elevate them to leadership roles around the world. He says this includes people like Mark Rutte, Antonio Guterres, who's, he's the guy that's always saying crazy stuff about climate change at the UN. Jens Stoltenberg is on the list, who used to be in charge of NATO, and even Ursula von der Leyen. Yeah, apparently she got her start at these meetings too. So we have Mark Rutte and Jens Stoltenberg, who first attended Bilderberg, and were later elevated to NATO leadership, and then overtook Bilderberg's co-chairmanship. This guy, Peter Carrington, previously followed the same exact career path. It seems like there's been some kind of revolving door between Bilderberg and NATO for quite a while, and a similar revolving door appears between Bilderberg and the EU, especially the European Commission. Leaders often attend Bilderberg before they rise to leadership positions, and it's clear as day. But I want to stick to two main examples, von der Leyen and this guy Wolfenson. Anyway, when it came to Ursula von der Leyen, she attended 4 Bilderberg conferences before she began her first presidency of the European Commission in 2019. Politico put it bluntly, saying, and I quote, Bilderberg, Davos, Munich, von der Leyen. She has quietly built an extensive international network in politics and business, connections that won her the nod for the EU's top job, end of quote. However, this interview also had some insights into Bill Clinton too. So it all starts with this guy, Wolfenson, who headed the World Bank from 1995 to 2005, thanks in part to Vernon Jordan, a powerful figure in the U.S. Democratic Party, and member of Bilderberg's steering committee. Now, this guy, Vernon Jordan, also helped to advance the career of Bill Clinton. As The Guardian put it, Jordan is widely credited with pulling the strings to get Wolfenson his job as president of the World Bank. Since Jordan was Clinton's close friend, his unelected unofficial advisor, who nurtured him into the White House, end of quote. Now, these three men were all Bilderbergers. Wolfenson appeared at the Bilderberg conference for the first time in 1985, when Jordan also attended. The two went on to meet again at around 20 of these different events. Vernon Jordan also helped to ensure that Bill Clinton was invited to the Bilderberg conference in 1991. 2 years later, he won the U.S. presidential election. And then Clinton subsequently installed Wolfenson into his leadership position at the World Bank. Alright, so Bill Clinton gets his first invite to Bilderberg, and then a few years later becomes the US president. Now, okay, so Bilderberg is not the only elite international club that can help boost your career, including those in national politics. US President Jimmy Carter belonged to the Trilateral Commission, which has partially overlapping membership with Bilderberg. He installed many people from the Trilateral Commission, like Brzezinski and Walter Mondale, into various high posts in US politics and the Federal Reserve. And on top of that, at least 3 World Bank presidents, from Robert McNamara, Alden Clausen, and Barbara Conable, were Trilateral Commission members. Therefore, some critics label the Trilateral Commission as a springboard for elevation to political power. And yeah, I think that's a safe bet. Okay, so we're almost done, but the last couple questions were also quite illuminating. And I quote, "Drawing on your previous work, why do you think Bilderberg satisfies the neo-Marxist concept of the transnational capitalist class?" He goes on to say that there are 3 main academic proponents of the concept of the transnational capitalist class: William Robinson, Leslie Sclair, and William Carroll. They all claim that elite policy groups like Bilderberg and the Trilateral Commission contribute to the formation and coordination of global affairs. The transnational capitalist class and Bilderberg have promoted the same or similar agendas that revolve around inter- or supranationalism, and free trade, free market policies, which I don't think is true anymore. Anyway, he says that Bilderberg can serve as a proxy for a transnational Atlantic elite class. In his view, the elite group is comprised of 4 factions: corporate, political, technical, and consumerist. Now, he sees the corporate faction as dominant, and that's corroborated by the changing composition of Bilderberg meetings. In recent decades, Bilderberg has mirrored the global power shift from the political to the economic sphere, and to transnational capital. So if you go all the way back to the beginning, in the early 1950s, the people that showed up to Bilderberg included politicians, diplomats, and other public officials. However, today, most of the participants are CEOs and corporate officials. And that brings us to the final question. Given the global prominence of many people at Bilderberg, should the public be at all concerned about Bilderberg's elitism? And I quote, "Generally, I do not want to demonize Bilderberg as many critics do, but I also don't want to whitewash it as some advocates tend to do as well. Both these extremes are misleading, and we need to find a balanced position in between, although it's not easy. Elitism is not the only problematic aspect of Bilderberg, and it isn't confined solely to Bilderberg. Every executive elite club that handles political issues poses a challenge to the ideals of participatory democracy. There are legitimate concerns each time politicians and business people meet behind closed doors. And yeah, I couldn't agree more." Anyway, he goes on to say elites have disproportionate power and by extension, disproportionate responsibility. The elitists fraternizing at these places like Bilderberg enhance their power. We should be concerned about the overall gap between the elites and the general public, especially as this gap is growing. Elite summits are part of a broader and deeper problem of complex social inequalities. So he goes on to say that he agrees with Diana Kendall, that elite clubs provide their members advantages, mainly in the form of social capital. And in doing so, these elite clubs contribute to inequality, estrangement, and mistrust between the elites and everybody else. You know, many Bilderbergers also attend the World Economic Forum, which is even less secretive than Bilderberg. And still, there are reasons for public concern about the World Economic Forum as well. And yeah, we should be worried about all of it. Bilderberg, the World Economic Forum, the Trilateral Commission, even the Council on Foreign Relations. Our policies are not dictated by the will of the people, and that's a huge problem, naturally. Anyway, he continues, and I quote, "This brings us back to the transnational capitalist class and to the public lamenting the fact that the elites promote largely self-serving policies. Let me finish with a very poignant quote from David Rothkopf's book, Superclass. The aligned interests of large segments of the superclass often produce the same outcomes that dark conspiracies might. A world that often seems to favor those who need favor the least, that empowers the powerful and ignores even the most urgent needs of the weakest." End of quote. So, yeah, there you have it. Backroom deals, cronyism, and a neo-Marxist agenda, all perpetuated by the people they choose to put into leadership positions. And although, even with those answers, this guy refuses to claim that it's some sort of shadow world government, but to me, the evidence is clear. This is where decisions are made, and where the strings become attached to their puppets. Until next time, once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals, or you can use PayPal. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.